In a world where prejudice often goes unchallenged, one woman's harrowing experience ignites a movement for justice and accountability. Black woman gets harassed on a flight. Then the airline CEO steps in, tells the inspiring story of Nia Johnson, a civil rights attorney who refuses to stay silent when faced with blatant racism aboard an international flight. As tensions escalate and the incident goes viral, Nia's courage draws global attention, forcing Skyline Airlines CEO Alexandra Hartman to confront systemic failures head-on. Together, they embark on a transformative journey that challenges stereotypes, empowers marginalized voices, and redefines corporate responsibility. Through resilience, vulnerability, and unwavering determination, Nia and Alexandra inspire individuals and institutions alike to stand against injustice. This gripping narrative explores themes of empowerment, systemic change, and the enduring power of unity, leaving readers with a profound message. When we dare to speak up and work together, even the smallest actions can spark monumental progress. Prepare to be moved, inspired, and called to action. The hum of the plane engines filled the cabin, a low, steady drone that seemed to press down on everyone inside. The overhead lights flickered faintly, casting dim pools of light over cramped seats and restless passengers. People shifted uncomfortably, their movements small but telling, elbows tucked in tighter, knees pulled closer, heads turned away from strangers. It was an atmosphere heavy with tension, though no one spoke of it. Instead, they stared at books they weren't reading or scrolled through phones they barely saw, each person cocooned in their own unease. Nia sat upright in her seat, her tailored blazer crisp against the dull gray fabric of the airline chair. She exuded calm professionalism, her posture perfect, her hands resting lightly on the keyboard of her laptop. But there were cracks in the armor if you looked closely enough. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she typed. She opened a new email draft and began reviewing notes from her keynote speech at the Human Rights Conference just hours earlier. Words like justice, equality, and systemic change stood out on the screen. Bold reminders of why she did what she did. Yet here she was, back in this space where none of those ideals felt safe. A man across the aisle caught her eye briefly before looking away. Mark Reynolds glanced again, this time letting his gaze linger. His lips pressed together in a thin line and his shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Nia noticed but said nothing. She'd learned long ago how quickly glances could turn into something more dangerous. As the plane climbed higher, Mark muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, "Some people just don't know when to give others space." Nia paused mid-typing, her hands hovering over the keys. Her jaw tightened, but she forced herself to breathe deeply and refocus. She told herself it wasn't worth it. Not yet. Not now. So she continued typing, drafting an email about her upcoming court case against police brutality. Her words were sharp, deliberate, every sentence cutting through the fog of injustice, but her hands still shook. Inside, memories surfaced unbidden. A teacher dismissed her questions because she assumed Nia wouldn't understand the answer. Classmates, laughing when she tried to join their group project, whispering things she couldn't quite hear but understood all the same. Each memory layered itself onto the present moment, building walls around her heart. Don't engage, she thought. It's not worth it. But Mark wasn't done. His voice grew louder, carrying across the narrow aisle. You'd think someone would have taught her some manners by now, he said to the passenger next to him, nodding toward Nia. He leaned forward, gesturing exaggeratedly. Look at this, she's leaning so far into my side I can barely move. Other passengers exchanged awkward glances. Some frowned, others looked down at their laps, avoiding eye contact altogether. An elderly woman sitting 2 rows ahead offered Nia a sympathetic smile, but it was fleeting, gone before anyone else could see it. No one said a word. The silence stretched taut, complicit and suffocating. Nia gripped the armrest until her knuckles turned white. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. This wasn't fear. It was frustration, anger boiling beneath the surface. How many times had she been reduced to these stereotypes? Reduced to someone who didn't belong, someone who took up too much space, someone who smelled bad or talked too loudly or simply existed wrong. How many times had she swallowed her pride, bit her tongue, smiled politely while the world whispered lies about her? She stared out the window, watching clouds blur past like smudged paint. Her reflection stared back at her, a strong face determined despite everything. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited. Enough. Enough of staying quiet. Enough of shrinking herself to fit into spaces designed to exclude her. If Mark wanted to fight, fine. But it wouldn't be on his terms. Not this time. As the tension thickened, filling the cabin like smoke, the stage was set for something bigger. Casual racism rarely stayed casual for long. It spiraled, feeding off indifference and silence. Institutions failed to step in, bystanders failed to act, and individuals like Nia bore the weight of it all. But even as exhaustion threatened to pull her under, determination kept her afloat. Clenching her jaw, she promised herself one thing. This time, she wouldn't let prejudice win without a fight. Mark's voice rose above the hum of the plane, sharp and cutting. "I'm telling you, she smells bad," he said loudly, his tone dripping with disdain as he leaned toward the passenger beside him. "It's like some people don't even think about personal hygiene." He didn't bother lowering his voice, ensuring that Nia and everyone else nearby could hear every word clearly. Nia flinched but kept her eyes fixed on the laptop screen in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen mid-motion. She told herself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. But inside, a storm was brewing. The whispers began almost immediately, rippling through the rows like wind rustling dry leaves. Passengers glanced at one another, some offering quick, apologetic smiles in Nia's direction before looking away just as fast. An elderly woman across the aisle caught Nia's eye briefly, her expression soft with sympathy. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Nia thought maybe, just maybe, the woman might say something. But then the elderly woman turned back to her book, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence around them felt heavier than ever, suffocating in its complicity. As Mark continued his tirade, memories flooded Nia's mind unbidden. She was 10 years old again, sitting at the back of her 5th grade classroom while her teacher handed out math tests. When she raised her hand to ask a question, the teacher sighed audibly. "Are you sure you're ready for this, sweetheart?" she'd asked, her tone patronizing. Or later, in middle school, when her classmates laughed as they excluded her from group projects. "You wouldn't understand anyway," one boy sneered. Each memory hit her like a wave, pulling her deeper into frustration and doubt. Was this what it always came down to? Being reduced to stereotypes no matter how hard she worked or how much she achieved? She gripped the armrest tighter, her nails digging into the fabric. Outside, the clouds rolled past the window, indifferent to her turmoil. The flight attendants moved cautiously down the aisle, their steps deliberate but hesitant. One of them, a young black woman with tired eyes, glanced nervously at Nia before averting her gaze. Another, an older man of South Asian descent, adjusted his tie and avoided making eye contact altogether. They knew better than to intervene, not when complaints from passengers like Mark could cost them their jobs. Their reluctance hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the systemic barriers that trapped them all. Mark leaned forward now, addressing anyone who would listen. "Look, I work hard for what I have," he declared, his voice tinged with indignation. "And I expect basic decency in return. Some people just don't get it. They don't know how to respect boundaries." His words carried a weight far beyond their surface meaning, laced with entitlement and privilege. To him, Nia wasn't just an inconvenience. She was a symbol of everything he resented, a changing world where people like her dared to take up space. Then came the demand, sharp and accusatory. "You need to move," he snapped, pointing at the empty seat across the aisle. "This is a safety issue. You're encroaching on my personal space." For a moment, Nia considered it. Just stand, up, walk away, let him win. It would be easier, wouldn't it? Less exhausting. But something inside her rebelled against the idea. She straightened her spine, meeting his glare head-on. "I'm not moving," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I paid for this seat same as you. If there's a problem, take it up with the airline." Mark's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Some people just can't handle authority. Around them, tempers flared. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some leaning closer to eavesdrop, while others tried desperately to disengage. A businessman tapped nervously on his phone, avoiding eye contact. A mother clutched her child closer, whispering reassurances. The tension crackled like static electricity, charging the already stifling cabin air. And then, someone pulled out their phone. A young woman seated 2 rows behind Nia held it up discreetly, capturing the entire exchange. Within seconds, the video was uploaded online, tagged with "darn flight racism." Comments poured in almost instantly, voices of outrage and solidarity spreading like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying the incident until it became impossible to ignore. Social media users shared their own experiences of discrimination, turning the hashtag into a rallying cry for justice. Nia felt the shift in energy around her. People were watching, really watching, for the first time. The realization strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been silenced, dismissed, or demeaned because of who they were. She squared her shoulders, refusing to look away from Mark. Let him see her strength. Let the world see it too. By the time the plane touched down, Nia had transformed. Exhaustion still lingered in her bones, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. Knowing the world was watching, she vowed to use this moment, not just to fight back, but to inspire change. Change for herself, for others like her, and for a society that so desperately needed it. Alexandra Hartman sat at the head of the conference table, her laptop open in front of her. The room buzzed with routine chatter, quarterly reports, revenue projections, customer satisfaction metrics. But when the viral video appeared on her screen, everything stopped. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched Nia endure insult after insult, humiliation unfolding in real time. Alexandra's hands trembled slightly as she paused the footage, her face reflecting a mix of horror and disbelief. How could this happen on one of her flights? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders, pressing down until she felt it in every nerve ending. Without hesitation, Alexandra stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," she said sharply to her assistant. "I need a jet ready within the hour." Her team exchanged startled glances but didn't question her urgency. They knew better than to argue when Alexandra spoke like that. Her voice carried authority, but also an unmistakable edge of determination. As the private jet took off, Alexandra stared out the window, replaying the video in her mind. This wasn't just about damage control. It was personal. She owed Nia more than an apology. She owed her action. The airport was chaotic when Alexandra arrived. Reporters swarmed the terminal, microphones thrust into the air like weapons, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Passengers milled about, whispering about the incident that had gone global overnight. Alexandra moved through the crowd with purpose, her tailored suit and confident stride drawing attention. Yet beneath her composed exterior, her heart raced. What would Nia think of her? Would she see Alexandra as another corporate figurehead, offering hollow words, or worse, would she dismiss her entirely? When Alexandra finally found Nia waiting near baggage claim, she hesitated for just a moment before approaching. "Ms. Johnson," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything you went through on our flight, for failing to protect you when we should have." Nia looked up, her dark eyes guarded. For a long moment she said nothing, studying Alexandra with a piercing gaze that seemed to weigh her sincerity. Finally she nodded curtly. "Thank you," she said. though the skepticism in her tone was impossible to miss. Determined to bridge the gap between them, Alexandra took a deep breath. "I understand if you don't trust me yet," she admitted, her voice softer now. "But I want you to know I've been where you are. Growing up as the daughter of immigrants, I faced prejudice too. People telling me I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough. It never goes away, does it?" Her vulnerability hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Nia's expression softened slightly, surprise flickering across her features. In that moment, something shifted, a fragile thread of connection forming between two women who understood pain all too well. Nia exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "It's exhausting," she admitted quietly, surprising even herself with how easily the words came. "You spend your whole life proving yourself only to be dismissed over and over again." Alexandra nodded, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And no one should have to live like that," she said firmly, "especially not on my watch." As they made their way toward the exit, reporters descended like vultures, shouting questions and shoving microphones in their faces. "Ms. Hartman, is this a PR stunt?" one called out. "Nia, do you plan to sue the airline?" another demanded. Flashbulbs popped relentlessly, blinding them both. Nia clenched her fists, her earlier resolve wavering under the onslaught. But then Alexandra stepped closer, her presence steady and grounding. "Let's show them what real leadership looks like," she murmured under her breath. Taking a deep breath, Nia stepped forward, silencing the clamor with a single raised hand. "I won't let this incident define me," she declared, her voice ringing out clear and strong despite the chaos around her. "What happened on that flight wasn't just about me. It was about systemic failures that allow racism to thrive, unchecked. We can't keep pretending these issues don't exist. Corporations, institutions, they have a responsibility to protect marginalized voices, not silence them." The crowd fell silent, captivated by her passion. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, momentarily struck by the power of her words. Seizing the moment, Nia continued, "This isn't just about Mark or Skyline Airlines. It's about holding society accountable, about demanding better from ourselves and each other. Because until we address the root causes of discrimination, nothing will change." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, but the emotion only made her message more compelling. Around them, people nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. Beside her, Alexandra stepped forward, her posture unwavering. "As CEO of Skyline Airlines, I take full responsibility for what happened," she announced, her voice firm and resolute. "Starting today, we're implementing mandatory anti-racism training for all employees. We're revising policies to ensure discriminatory behavior is addressed immediately and without exception, and we're creating channels for passengers to report incidents without fear of retaliation." Her words echoed through the terminal, met with a mixture of cheers and murmurs of approval. Not everyone agreed. Backlash came swiftly and fiercely. Critics accused Alexandra of pandering to public opinion, of prioritizing optics over substance. Shareholders grumbled about the cost of reforms, while online trolls attacked her decisions with venomous comments. But amidst the criticism were messages of support, from passengers who had witnessed similar incidents, from employees grateful for leadership willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Each positive response fortified Alexandra's resolve. Change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As the press conference wound down, Alexandra turned to Nia, her expression earnest. "Thank you," she said simply, "for speaking your truth, for pushing us to do better." Nia smiled faintly, the gesture carrying a hint of pride. Together, they walked toward the exit, side by side. Cameras flashed once more, capturing the image of two women united, not just by circumstance, but by a shared vision for a better future. In that moment, standing together against the world, they became symbols of hope. Their partnership reminded everyone watching that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience and solidarity could spark transformation. And as they disappeared into the crowd, the ripple effects of their courage spread far beyond the confines of the airport, igniting conversations and inspiring action across the globe. Months passed, and Nia stood in a courtroom filled with quiet anticipation. The judge's gavel struck the bench, echoing through the room like a thunderclap. "In light of the evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff," he announced, his voice steady and clear. A wave of relief washed over Nia, as cheers erupted from her supporters gathered behind her. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a triumph for every person who had ever been dismissed, marginalized, or silenced by institutionalized racism. Her case against law enforcement became a landmark decision, cited in legal circles and celebrated by activists nationwide. For Nia, it was validation that her fight mattered, not just for herself, but for the countless others whose stories had gone unheard. News of the verdict spread quickly, igniting conversations across social media and news outlets. People shared Nia's story, drawing strength from her resilience. Marginalized communities saw themselves in her journey, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage could spark change. In schools and community centers, people began speaking out about their own experiences with discrimination, emboldened by Nia's example. She had become more than a lawyer. She was a symbol of hope, proof that one person's determination could ripple outward and inspire collective action. Meanwhile, Alexandra faced mounting pressure from Skyline Airlines' shareholders. Boardroom meetings turned tense as executives questioned the necessity of her reforms. "This is costing us money," one shareholder argued, his tone sharp with frustration. "Anti-racism training, policy overhauls, these are distractions from our bottom line." Others echoed similar sentiments, accusing her of prioritizing public relations over profitability. Yet Alexandra remained steadfast, her resolve unwavering. "Change isn't easy," she countered, her voice firm. "But if we're serious about equity, we have to invest in it. Not because it's profitable, but because it's right." Under Alexandra's leadership, Skyline Airlines transformed into a model for inclusive practices. Employees attended workshops where they learned to recognize bias and address discriminatory behavior effectively. New policies empowered passengers to report incidents without fear of retaliation, ensuring accountability at every level. Passengers noticed the shift too. Flight attendants greeted them warmly. Conflicts were resolved respectfully, and the overall atmosphere felt safer and more welcoming. Slowly but surely, the airline became synonymous with progress, earning praise from advocacy groups and customers alike. The narrative shifted to quieter moments, small victories unfolding across society. A teacher incorporated Nia's story into her lesson plan, encouraging students to think critically about systemic injustice. A young man filed a complaint after witnessing racial profiling at work, inspired by Nia's refusal to stay silent. Even strangers exchanged knowing nods when discussing the changes happening around them. Each act, no matter how minor, carried weight, a testament to the power of individual courage multiplying into something greater. One evening, a young girl sat cross-legged on her living room floor, eyes glued to the television screen. Nia appeared on a late-night talk show, her eloquence and poise captivating viewers. The girl listened intently as Nia spoke about overcoming adversity and using her voice to demand justice. When the interview ended, the girl turned to her mother, her expression resolute. "I want to be like her," she declared, clutching a notebook close to her chest. "I want to help people." Her words carried the promise of a new generation ready to pick up the torch and continue the fight for equality. Elsewhere, a former flight attendant named Elena decided it was time to take action. Inspired by Nia and Alexandra's efforts, she started a support group for colleagues facing workplace discrimination. At first, only a handful of employees attended the meetings, hesitant to share their stories. But as trust grew, so did the group's impact. Members exchanged advice, reported incidents confidently, and supported one another through challenges. What began as a small initiative soon gained traction, spreading to other airlines and industries. Grassroots movements like these highlighted the importance of collective action in creating lasting change. One afternoon, Nia returned home to find an envelope waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter from Alexandra. "Dear Nia," it began, "I can never fully express my gratitude for what you've done, not just for Skyline Airlines, but for me personally. Your courage reminded me why I do this work. Because of you, we've taken steps toward real equity, and I know there's still so much more to achieve. Thank you for being brave enough to speak your truth." As Nia read the note, tears welled up in her eyes. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of pride. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of her influence. Her voice hadn't just been heard, it had catalyzed meaningful transformation. Later that evening, Nia stepped onto her balcony, gazing upward at the vast expanse of sky. Stars dotted the darkness, infinite and untouchable, yet somehow within reach. She thought about all the lives touched by her journey. The young girl dreaming of justice, the flight attendants finding solidarity, the passengers benefiting from safer travel. Each moment represented progress, however incremental, toward a better world. As she stood there, a sense of peace settled over her. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she knew transformative change was possible. One voice, one action, one step at a time. The story concluded with an implicit call to action, urging readers to reflect on their role in combating racism. Overcoming prejudice required unity, empathy, and relentless effort. It meant standing firm in the face of resistance, amplifying marginalized voices and holding institutions accountable. While the journey was far from over, the message was clear. Transformative change was always within reach, as long as people remained committed to working together. And so, with hearts full of hope, individuals everywhere found renewed purpose, ready to carry the torch forward into a brighter future. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with friends, family, or anyone who needs to hear a message of resilience and hope. Let's amplify voices that challenge injustice and inspire change. Subscribe for more stories that tackle real-world issues, celebrate courage, and ignite meaningful conversations. Together, we can create a community committed to progress, one story at a time. Your support helps us continue shining a light on the power of empathy, unity, and action. So hit that button now and join the movement toward a better tomorrow.